This is something he's been waiting for, and he's probably spent more time thinking about it. For the rest of us, it's more a question of, okay, we have to shift the way we support.
Breaking from London tonight, the moment that has set Buckingham Palace ablaze with speculation and whispers of crisis. During a high-profile diplomatic reception, King Charles III was publicly interrupted and, some would say, overruled by Queen Camilla in front of cameras, foreign dignitaries, and her own family. What should have been a routine gesture of royal diplomacy turned into a thunderclap moment for the monarchy. And now, insiders are calling it the beginning of a silent war inside Buckingham. Witnesses describe the scene as frozen in disbelief. According to those present, the king had just begun his remarks about cultural cooperation between Britain and Sweden when Camilla advanced across the room, cutting through the air with a sharp command. "Come on, Charles, that's enough." Her tone, clipped and public, left even seasoned courtiers stunned. It was less a wife speaking to her husband, one royal aide confided, and more a superior correcting a subordinate. Within seconds, the king lowered his head and stepped back. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute, but its shockwaves still ripple through every corridor of the palace. Social media lit up within hours. Clips of the encounter flooded TikTok and X, drawing millions of views. The comment sections were merciless. "He looked diminished," one post read, "as if he wasn't the king, but a man being handled." British tabloids splashed the photos across their front pages the next morning. "Queen commands the king." By dawn, the question wasn't just about royal etiquette, it was about control. Has the king lost his grip, or is someone else quietly steering the throne? Palace sources tried to downplay the tension, describing the moment as a minor misunderstanding and Camilla's instinctive attempt to help. But several insiders tell a different story. According to one senior household official, this wasn't spontaneous. She's been asserting herself in meetings, controlling access, even editing the king's speaking notes. This is about influence, not affection. For Princess Anne, the king's sister, the incident was reportedly a breaking point. Known for her stoic loyalty and unshakable discipline, she was seen standing in the background during the exchange, her expression unreadable, but her silence louder than words. Sources close to Anne say she has long been concerned about a subtle erosion of the king's authority since the coronation. "Anne doesn't do drama," one confidant told The Telegraph. "But when she acts, it's because she's seen a line crossed." Analysts are now calling the Buckingham episode the most serious public crack in the royal hierarchy since the Diana years. "It's not about scandal," said royal historian Margaret Kellingsworth. "It's about perception. A monarch must embody control. The moment the public senses weakness, or worse, manipulation, the entire image of stability begins to fracture. As the global press replays the footage frame by frame, speculation intensifies. Was Camilla simply overstepping in a moment of stress, or has she become the power behind the crown? And how much longer can the king's inner circle ignore what many now describe as a brewing internal crisis? In the midst of this growing storm, Princess Anne has reportedly begun taking quiet, deliberate steps, not for revenge, but for preservation. One palace aide put it simply, "She's watching, she's recording, and she's not going to let her brother's crown become someone else's stage." The monarchy has faced countless controversies, but rarely one that feels so personal, so visible, and so symbolic. For the first time in decades, the question echoing through London society isn't about who wears the crown, but who truly wields it. And yet, as one veteran royal observer warned, what we saw that night was only the surface. Something deeper has shifted inside the palace. The facade of unity is cracking, and the consequences will reach far beyond one awkward moment. Because according to every whisper coming out of Buckingham this week, that single word from Camilla, that single step forward, wasn't a mistake. It was a move. and it has set in motion a battle for power that no one, not even the king's own family, can stop. In the days that followed, the palace tried desperately to reclaim normalcy, but the tremor from that single moment refused to fade. Behind Buckingham's gilded gates, something intangible had shifted. Staff whispered of new protocol adjustments, while senior courtiers described a chilling atmosphere, tense, cautious, and strangely watchful. "Everyone is walking on eggshells," said one insider, familiar with the king's private household. "Camilla's office now oversees every engagement request before it reaches His Majesty. Even personal notes from family go through her secretary first." It was a quiet restructuring, not official, but unmistakable. In the name of efficiency, Camilla's influence was expanding. For most of Britain, the scandal became morning coffee conversation. But for Princess Anne, it was personal. She had spent her life serving the crown with an iron sense of duty, shaped by her mother's mantra, "Never confuse love with weakness." Those who know her best say Anne recognized the signs immediately. "She's seen this kind of manipulation before, just never this close to home," one retired aide confided. Publicly, the royal family appeared united, but privately, insiders say Anne began noticing strange inconsistencies. Orders issued without Charles's awareness, documents amended after his approval, and palace staff subtly realigned under Camilla's allies. "It was death by 1,000 cuts," remarked a senior equerry. No one could point to one major breach, but collectively, the balance of power was shifting. The moment that solidified Anne's concern came at another public event, a charity gala in London dedicated to children's welfare. The scene was meant to be light, symbolic, and warm. Royalty serving food to show humility. Instead, it turned into what one BBC producer later called an unintentional public humiliation. Anne. Witnesses recall the Queen consort turning to her husband mid-event, smiling for the cameras but delivering a sharp instruction just loud enough for microphones to catch. "You do it, Charles. They'll like it better." The king hesitated, visibly. For a man once hailed as steadfast and articulate, that brief uncertainty spoke volumes. Cameras zoomed in as Charles, expression tense but polite, rolled up his sleeves and began serving soup to guests. Applause filled the room, but not all of it was admiration. "You could feel the discomfort," said a reporter present that night. "It wasn't endearing, it was awkward. People didn't know whether to cheer or look away." From her seat near the back, Princess Anne watched everything. Those close to her say she sat still, her expression composed, but her knuckles were white on the armrest. "That was the moment she decided something had to change," said a source close to the princess. "She knew her brother wasn't ill. He was being managed." What happened afterward unfolded quietly, almost invisibly. Anne began making discreet inquiries, calling on trusted aides who had served the royal household for decades. She didn't want gossip, one confidant revealed. She wanted facts, proof of how deep this control went. Soon, patterns began to emerge. Meetings rescheduled without the king's consent. Draft speeches altered to echo Camilla's phrasing. Invitations to state events filtered through her private secretary. Even the choice of charities, once the king's personal passion, was now being shaped by Camilla's communications strategy. According to one palace veteran, it was clear she wasn't just supporting him, she was directing him. Meanwhile, royal analysts began drawing parallels between this crisis and the chaos of the 1990s. "We're watching the monarchy enter another psychological storm," said historian Rachel Byford. But this time, the struggle isn't public scandal, it's internal control. And Anne, as the late Queen's most disciplined heir to her sense of order, may be the only one strong enough to stop it. Publicly, the palace maintained its signature silence. No statements, no denials. But online, the narrative had already escaped their grasp. Clips of the king serving soup were now trending under hashtags like "number king in control or not" and "number Camilla commands." Commentators debated everything from gender dynamics to royal succession. Yet, through all the noise, one sentiment resonated again and again. Something is wrong inside Buckingham Palace. By the end of that week, a quiet determination had replaced Anne's disbelief. Late one night, she was seen leaving her Kensington residence with a folder under her arm. Her security detail said nothing. Her driver avoided eye contact. But one witness described her expression as set in stone. She looked exactly like her mother in moments of crisis, an observer told The Times. Calm, cold, decided. For Princess Anne, this was no longer a matter of image or pride. This was about legacy, about protecting the institution that defined her family for generations. She's her mother's daughter, a palace insider said. And when she moves, it's not for show. It's for survival. The monarchy had faced gossip, scandal, and loss before. But this was different. This was an invisible takeover, a quiet corrosion from within. And Anne was preparing to confront it, not with words, but with proof. Because, as one veteran courtier whispered under the condition of anonymity, if the king's own sister has begun keeping records, then the palace should be very afraid. End 4. The turning point came not in a council chamber or private meeting, but under the dazzling lights of a televised charity gala, a night meant to celebrate compassion, not ignite controversy. The theme was Support the Future, a national event broadcast across Britain. Cameras lined the hall, reporters whispered behind press barriers, and the royal orchestra played softly as guests awaited the king and queen consort. But what unfolded before millions of viewers would soon become one of the most dissected royal moments in recent history. The royal couple arrived hand in hand, smiling for the cameras. Charles looked calm, though those close to him later said his cheer was strained, almost practiced. Camilla, by contrast, radiated confidence, her pearls gleaming, her steps sharp with certainty. The plan was simple: to symbolize royal humility by serving food to underprivileged children. A charming, harmless bit of optics. But the script didn't hold for long. According to a BBC staffer stationed near the buffet table, you could sense the tension. Camilla was in charge, directing photographers, adjusting people's positions, even telling the MC when to cue. Then, just as Charles was chatting warmly with a volunteer, Camilla turned, ladle in hand, and made her move. "You do it, Charles," she said sweetly, her voice carrying just enough for the microphones to catch. "They'll like it better." The crowd fell silent. There was a half smile from the king, then hesitation. The cameras zoomed in mercilessly. Within seconds, the world saw it, the sovereign of the United Kingdom, sleeves rolled up, serving soup as his wife looked on approvingly. The optics were striking, but not for the reasons intended. "People didn't see humility," one television producer said afterward. "They saw subservience." Social media erupted instantly. Clips of the exchange circulated with captions like, "The king who serves" and "Is he even allowed to speak?" Analysts appeared on talk shows debating whether this was an innocent PR stunt or something far more telling. One commentator on Good Morning Britain called it a new low in royal optics, adding, "You can't unsee a monarch taking orders from anyone, least of all his consort." But while the tabloids gorged on humiliation, something else was happening quietly behind the palace walls. From her discreet seat among the royal family that night, Princess Anne saw the whole thing, every uncomfortable pause, every strained smile. She didn't look away, and those who sat near her say her expression never changed, but her hand clenched so tightly around her clutch that the knuckles turned white. Later that evening, back in her Kensington study, Anne replayed the footage. "It wasn't pity," a friend recalled. "It was fury, controlled, contained but unmistakable." According to a source close to the princess, Anne had already begun compiling a private record, a quiet ledger of incidents where Camilla overstepped protocol or subtly undermined her brother. The charity gala, though, became the final spark. She realized this wasn't care or partnership, the source explained. It was control, And if it went unchecked, the monarchy itself could become a stage for one woman's ambition. By the next morning, Anne had contacted two of her longest-serving aides, trusted figures from the late Queen's circle, both known for their loyalty and discretion. Her instruction was simple: find everything. Who Camilla met, who she called, what she spent, what influence she quietly exerted behind the king's back. Anne operates like a soldier, one insider said. She doesn't gossip, she strategizes. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham, rumours began to swirl. Staff noticed Anne's private secretary making more frequent visits to the palace archives. Confidential memos were being requested, ones that hadn't been reviewed in years. A small network of courtiers, sympathetic to Anne's cause, began quietly feeding her information. "There's a deep sense of loyalty to her," said a retired royal aide. "For many, she embodies the last echo of the late Queen's discipline." And all the while, Camilla's shadow over palace operations continued to grow. Her sister, Annabel, was increasingly seen at internal planning sessions. Invitations for key state functions began arriving with her notes attached. According to one palace administrator, it felt like the Queen Consort was building her own infrastructure, her own court inside the court. Royal commentators now describe this period as the beginning of the Cold War within Buckingham. On the surface, everything gleamed: charity work, banquets, smiling portraits. But beneath, loyalties were hardening into quiet factions. Anne's allies, few but steadfast, began referring to the situation by a single phrase: the crown must be protected. Anne's late mother had once told her, "The throne is not power, it is service." Now those words haunted her. If the monarchy's service was being twisted into obedience, what legacy remained? One evening, a close friend reportedly found Anne sitting alone, staring at the ring her mother had given her engraved with 3 words: "Protect the legacy." That's when she decided, the friend said. She wouldn't just observe, she would act. And so, as the headlines mocked the king and the public laughed off the soup incident as another royal oddity, Princess Anne was already moving in silence. She wasn't planning a rebellion, she was preparing a reckoning. Because for the first time in decades, the threat to the crown wasn't coming from the outside world, it was sitting beside the throne. It began with a single envelope, thick, sealed in brown leather, and stamped with the insignia for Her Royal Highness's eyes only. Delivered quietly to Kensington Palace one mist-shrouded morning, it contained what would later be described by one palace insider as the most explosive dossier since the days of Diana. Inside those pages lay proof, not rumour, not speculation, of just how far Queen Camilla's reach had extended into the machinery of the monarchy. According to sources close to Princess Anne, she received the package in silence. Her aides were dismissed, the door double-locked. Candlelight flickered across her desk as she began to read. Page after page, the details grew darker. Camilla's network, it seemed, was not confined to charm or influence. It had structure, money, and quiet authority. The first revelation was deceptively simple. Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, once merely an interior designer on the Duchy of Cornwall's payroll, had been quietly installed as an informal advisor inside Buckingham Palace. Meeting minutes showed her presence at high-level discussions involving royal property allocations and funding decisions. "It's unprecedented," said one senior household official. "No non-royal family member should ever be present at state briefings. It's a breach of centuries-old protocol." The dossier included photos too, grainy yet unmistakable. Annabel seated beside senior courtiers, taking notes, whispering to secretaries, signing documents she had no clearance to access. In the margins, Anne scrawled one word in red ink: infiltration. But the revelations didn't stop there. The next section chronicled a pattern of appearances by Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopes. Officially a private citizen, Laura had been quietly inserted into intimate royal gatherings once reserved for bloodline heirs. Among them, a private dinner at Sandringham Palace held in honour of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Anne herself had missed that night due to an overseas charity engagement, but attached to the report were photographs. Laura, radiant in a crimson gown, seated near the head of the table, chatting with senior advisors. She was being introduced as though she were part of the dynasty, said a source close to the archival team who reviewed the images. It wasn't a slip, it was deliberate positioning. Then came the financials, the kind of numbers that could turn scandal into catastrophe. Between late 2023 and early 2024, over $25 million in royal funds had been redirected under the label of security renovations. The destination, Ray Mill House, Camilla's private residence in Wiltshire. The documents listed a string of shell companies, contractors, and ambiguous consultants, all funneling public money toward private luxury. Marble courtyards, reinforced gates, a new art gallery wing. Even more astonishing were the attached requests signed personally by Camilla for loans of priceless artworks from the Royal Collection Trust. Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Gainsborough, pieces once belonging to the crown itself. She turned her private home into a royal palace, an insider whispered. And she used the king's signature to do it. For Princess Anne, it was the breaking point. The candle beside her burned low, smoke curling upward as she read the final page, a ledger of transactions, each one initialed by Camilla's office. The last entry, written in her elegant cursive, read simply, "Approved by Her Majesty." Anne's hand trembled, not with fear but outrage. "This is theft disguised as privilege," she reportedly told a confidant that night, "and it's killing the crown from within." Hours later, she was seen walking the long corridors of Buckingham in near darkness. The guards saluted. She didn't respond. Somewhere deep inside the palace, she stopped at a quiet intersection, and there, emerging from a side chamber, stood the Queen Consort herself. "Charles needs guidance," Camilla said coolly when Anne confronted her. "The monarchy needs strength, and someone willing to lead." Anne's reply was measured but cutting. "You're confusing control with service, and I will not let you make a fool of my brother." Their eyes locked, two women bound by history, rivalry, and unspoken contempt. A heavy silence filled the corridor. Then Camilla turned, her perfume trailing behind her like a challenge. "Be careful, Anne," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "Not everyone who loves the crown survives it." When she disappeared into the shadows, Anne stood motionless, her pulse pounding. That was the moment, those close to her later said, when the decision crystallized. Words would no longer be enough. The next morning, Anne summoned Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh, calm, loyal, unshakably discreet. Together, they began crafting a plan. It would have the elegance of royal diplomacy and the precision of a military operation. Anne's command was simple: "We'll give her the stage, and she'll reveal herself." The trap would be set under the guise of a harmless meeting, one that even Camilla's arrogance couldn't resist. A charity project, a speech rehearsal, a few witnesses, nothing out of place, except for the hidden microphones. As dusk fell over Kensington that night, the faint light from Anne's study glowed through the curtains. Inside, maps of the palace were spread across her desk. Notes, witness lists, timelines. Every move charted with surgical care. She wasn't acting as a sister anymore. She was acting as the last defender of her mother's legacy. And for the first time in years, Anne allowed herself to whisper a prayer. Not for victory, but for truth. Because truth, she believed, was the one weapon Camilla couldn't manipulate. 3 days later, the trap was in motion. The invitation went out under Duchess Sophie's name, official, polite, and impossible to refuse. The letter requested Queen Camilla's presence at a preparatory meeting for the inauguration of a new royal charity centre in London, a project close to both her and the king's public image. The wording was flawless, respectful, warm, routine. Nothing about it hinted at the storm waiting beneath the surface. Camilla accepted immediately. "Of course," she told her private secretary. "It's time they remember who runs this palace." The meeting was scheduled for a quiet afternoon in the west wing of Buckingham Palace, a chamber rarely used, elegant yet unremarkable. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. At the centre of the room sat a small round table, laid with tea, biscuits, and a stack of folders. Hidden among the decorations was a tiny recording device, positioned beneath a porcelain vase. 3 witnesses had been selected by Anne herself, 2 senior protocol officers, and 1 Privy Council secretary, all sworn to confidentiality. Duchess Sophie presided, every inch the perfect host, calm, gracious, and disarmingly sincere. When Camilla arrived, dressed in emerald silk and diamonds that caught the light like daggers, she surveyed the room with an air of command. "Shall we begin?" she said, lowering herself into her chair with effortless authority. The conversation started harmlessly enough. The schedule of the charity event, guest lists, talking points for the King's upcoming address. Sophie, ever measured, nodded along, occasionally asking Camilla's opinion. Then came the moment Anne had scripted to perfection. "We've prepared a preliminary draft of His Majesty's speech," Sophie said softly. "It focuses on education and opportunity. Would you suggest any adjustments before we show it to the King?" There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence that seemed to stretch across the room. Then Camilla smiled, that thin, practiced smile that those close to her knew all too well. "I'll decide," she said crisply, her tone edged with command. "He'll say what I tell him to say." No one moved. The words hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. The 2 protocol officers exchanged stunned glances. The secretary lowered his head, his pen trembling as he wrote the sentence down. Sophie, maintaining her gentle smile, offered a small nod and poured more tea, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. In a nearby chamber, Princess Anne listened through a pair of discreet headphones, her jaw tightening with every word. When she heard Camilla's admission, she closed her eyes. The silence that followed was electric. The trap had sprung. For Anne, it wasn't triumph she felt. It was confirmation. The proof was no longer hidden behind whispers or speculation. It was spoken aloud, recorded, and witnessed. Camilla had declared herself the true power behind the throne. That evening, as the palace slept, Anne and Sophie met privately in the Duchess's study. The recording was transferred to a secure file, the witnesses' testimonies signed and sealed. They said nothing for a long while. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "This will change everything." Anne nodded. "It already has." The next morning, Anne's personal courier delivered a single envelope to the Privy Council, marked "Emergency Session Requested." The subject line was blunt: "Protocol breach and concerns over His Majesty's authority." For the first time in decades, the council chamber was sealed to the public. Only the King, his sister, and a handful of senior advisers would attend. The agenda: to determine whether the monarchy itself had been compromised from within. In the corridors of Buckingham, whispers spread faster than candlelight. "It's happening," one attendant murmured. "The Queen has overplayed her hand." And inside her Kensington study, Princess Anne sat quietly, her mother's ring gleaming under the lamplight. The battle was no longer a secret war. It was about to become history. The session convened under the kind of silence that history remembers. Inside the oak-panelled chamber of Buckingham's North Wing, the air was thick with tension. King Charles sat at the head of the long table, his hands clasped tightly, his expression unreadable. Opposite him stood Princess Anne, steady, composed, carrying the sealed dossier that could alter the monarchy's balance forever. When the room settled, a Privy Council secretary pressed play. Camilla's voice filled the air. "I'll decide. He'll say what I tell him to say." The sound was crisp, undeniable. It sliced through the chamber like a blade. For a moment, no one breathed. Then came the murmurs, low, disbelieving. The King's advisers exchanged glances. One senior official stood, verifying the date, location, and authenticity of the recording. The truth was irrefutable. Anne stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. She laid out every piece of evidence: the unauthorized advisors, the misused funds, the infiltration of protocol, the manipulation of her brother's role. "If a king can be spoken for," she said quietly, "then the crown itself ceases to exist." The words hit like thunder. For the first time in months, Charles lifted his gaze to meet his sisters. In that shared silence, something shifted. The hesitation that had haunted him seemed to fall away. His shoulders straightened, and though he said nothing, his eyes told her everything: gratitude, remorse, awakening. After hours of deliberation, the verdict came. Unanimous. The Queen Consort would be stripped of her authority to oversee royal communications and excluded from strategic meetings. All royal expenditures would now require dual oversight and public transparency. It was, in effect, a silent dethronement, the reclaiming of power without ever saying the word. When the decision was announced, Anne didn't celebrate. She simply inclined her head. "The crown has survived worse," she murmured, "but it must never forget what almost destroyed it." In the weeks that followed, the transformation was unmistakable. The king began reappearing with renewed confidence, speaking with warmth, leading with quiet strength. The British press hailed it as the monarch's second wind. Meanwhile, Camilla maintained her title and smile, but her presence had changed. Observers noted her careful tone, her measured steps, the flicker of unease that now followed her into every room. At a private family dinner, Charles raised his glass to Anne. "You've done what I couldn't," he said softly. "Thank you." She smiled faintly. "No one humiliates a king," she replied, "least of all my brother." And somewhere behind that polished palace facade, Camilla's glass trembled ever so slightly in her hand. The monarchy endured, but it had learned a brutal truth. Power may rest in the crown, but strength lives in those willing to defend it. Thank you for watching The Silent Crown, the shadow coup inside Buckingham Palace. What do you think? Is this the end of Camilla's influence, or just the calm before her revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next chapter of Royal Revelations.